Yeah, we're live. I'm gonna lighten that up because you never know what's going on here. There we go. That's all better. So welcome tonight. We're gonna look at some very cool stuff. One is you can see from the thumbnail and from my my post. We're gonna talk about the mighty 351 Cleveland, the best motor ever, and obviously everybody that's a fan of whatever motor they're a fan of is obviously going to say that. But tonight we get a kind of cool learning experience because in the comments last night, one of the people that were here made a comment about something, and I like to use these, and then followed that up with an email, which is interesting, to prove me wrong. And it's an interesting point, and it's a very good learning experience. So I'll preface this by saying this is a really good example of how we should approach the things that we say. I'll give you an example. If somebody, I get asked all the time, Richard, what's the best cam? Obviously, what's the best cam for my 5.3? So if I only ever had one answer for that, if I said, okay, this, like when somebody asked me about a 5-liter Ford, what's the best cam? Well, I try to steer them toward that Extreme Energy 274. It does a lot of things good. Is it the best cam? Well, here's the problem. What is your definition of best? Is it the one that makes the most peak power? Is it the one that makes the most average power? Is it the one that makes the most torque? Is it the one that drives the best? What is it? The one that does everything? you know, you have to be really specific about your definition of that one word description that you're using. What is it that determines that? So in your discussion about things, and we are making a statement that's an absolute statement, this is the best of everything, you have to be, more often than not, you have to be very specific. And the other thing that will come about this discussion is that when somebody says something to me, my immediate reaction, given what I do for a living, is to, my first thought is, okay, how would I test that? Not to test it to prove them wrong or to prove them right. It's just, if somebody wanted to make that claim, what would you have to do to prove that that's the case? That's how I analyze things. If somebody says, hey, look, the 69 Camaro is the best muscle car ever. Okay, so what would you have to do to figure out whether or not that's true, whether or not that statement like qualifies as the absolute thing? Okay, well, we'd have to take all the people in the world, we'd have to survey them, we'd have to show them pictures of all the cars, and then we'd have to take a survey and tell them answer different questions and figure out what our definition of best, all the things that go into that. Okay, how would we do that? Would everybody agree? No, they wouldn't. So would there be a universal thing where everyone said this is it? No, there wouldn't be that. So right away, my thing is, okay, it might be not a good idea for you to say that. For one, we won't even go into the motivation for the things that and we've been down that road before. What is your motivation for the things that you're saying? Why are you wanting that? Are you looking for, reaffirmation that you've made the right choice, or that kind of thing? We won't even go into that. It's just, let's just look at this from a logistic standpoint. How would you go about proving that? And we've got a perfect example tonight from, and I'm glad that he made a comment. And I'm going to go ahead and put our poll up early so that everybody knows what's going on. So the poll is the let's see. Okay. Is the Ford, we'll just even generalize it, is the Ford Cleveland engine family the most, I've got to make sure the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced? This should give me the kind of poll that I'm expecting usually, that almost never happens. Is the Ford Cleveland engine family the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced? And the reason that I'm saying that, I'm going to go ahead and read this quote, and we're going to get into this discussion because it's really good stuff. Turbo Monza, thank you. Thanks for showing up, man. Okay. Really? Why did I do that? I didn't even put it in as a poll. I just put it in as a statement. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to copy that. I'm going to create a poll. I'm going to put it in the poll question. Paste is the Ford Cleveland engine family. And there we go. Now it's a poll. I constantly do that. So we have our poll. Is the Ford Cleveland engine family the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced? So I want to read you. We'll jump into this. And so I want to talk about how we evaluate these kinds of statements and how difficult it is. And that's the thing when people talk about things like this. So the statement from last night is, Richard, back in the day, Super Ford magazine quoted Jack Roush, because we're throwing in a celebrity there, Jack Roush, a legendary guy, stating the Cleveland head and Pro Stock program made almost 900 horsepower and is the baddest, most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced. Jack Roush, obviously awesome, legendary, very good. The Cleveland Pro Stock stuff, the NASCAR stuff, any kind of drag racing, all of that stuff worked out very well. They were very successful in Trans Am with the smaller 302 stuff. And so we cleared this up. My comment was that seems like a lot. So I need to clear up what I was talking about last night. In the 70s, a Pro Stock, a Cleveland, an iron stock factory Cleveland headed Pro Stock motor never made 900 horsepower. Not during the 70s. It didn't do that. And so that was my statement. I said that it didn't, a Cleveland headed Pro Stock motor in the 70s didn't make 900 horsepower. Not that I know of. Maybe later on they did that, but it didn't in the 70s during the heyday of the Cleveland stuff. Maybe as it carried into the 80s later on, the full development, and not with an iron head, not with a modified factory iron head. Modern Cleveland stuff, and we're going to get into all of this. Modern Cleveland stuff, obviously, when you can take a blank sheet of paper and remake the Cleveland head the way that it should be made and do all the useful things. Just take a look at what they do with these heads in sprint car and NASCAR and all these things. They make a bajillion horsepower. And so the gentleman here made that statement, and I said that seems like a lot because I know that in the 70s or at least I think that in the 70s they didn't make anywhere near that. And there's no factory Cleveland head that will support anywhere near that power level. Aftermarket stuff, obviously, yes, because in the aftermarket land, we have everything that we want, and we're gonna talk about that as well. The gentleman then followed this up with sent me a link, which was awesome. Thank you very much. That was good stuff because it's the Engine Lab guys, which I follow and I like their stuff. He sent me a link of a 900 or a motor that made almost 900 horsepower. That was a tip of the hat, as it were, back to this nostalgia tunnel rammed kind of Pro Stockish area. It was 436 inches, dry sump, Carrillo rods. It had all modern stuff in it. It had a set of aftermarket heads on it, and so it was not. It did not represent what the Pro Stock was back in the 70s. It's very cool and made lots of power, and that's just nothing but awesome because. I like Cleveland's. Ever since I ran the Boss 302 and I was able to do the Boss 302 and the Boss 351 and compare them to the other small block heads of the era, I was like, oh yeah, I can see why these did so well because factory small block Chevy head, like 210 CFM, a Cleveland head, 275. So right off the bat, it's like, hey, look, I've got way more potential than any of the small block stuff in stock configuration. And so they did very well naturally, and having that much extra airflow, they did good in racing, and they did all that stuff. But what I want to talk about is how we would go about figuring out this statement, how we would go about qualifying the statement. And once again, I'll read the statement if I can find it here. I'll go ahead and read this. Okay. So the statement is, Richard, back in the day, Super Ford magazine quoted Jack Roush, legendary Jack Roush, stating the Cleveland head and Pro Stock program made almost 900 horsepower and is the baddest, most powerful most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced. So what I want to get into is I'm not interested in disproving this. I'm more interested in you guys understanding the procedure of figuring these kinds of things out. Because you can apply this to when somebody says, what is the best camshaft? What is the best blower or supercharger, turbo or engine family, or whatever they're saying, you can apply the same things that we're going to cover here, because there are a lot of things. So the first thing that I would say is the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced. So if we look at this as a giant statement, is any Cleveland headed thing, does it have the highest specific output of any motor ever produced? No, not even close. So as an absolute statement, that's not accurate, because we know that even a really good aftermarket, completely altered and redesigned Cleveland aluminum head in its current configuration is going to make, 2.2 to 2.5 horsepower per cubic inch. That's pretty good. That's really good, in fact. But the reality is that a really good dedicated race 4-valve motor is going to make 300 horsepower per liter. So it's going to be head and shoulders above anything that a Cleveland could ever wish, or any 2-valve motor could ever wish for. So right off the bat, it's not, as an absolute thing, as a race thing, it's not. The way that I like to approach these things, whether it's a camshaft or intake manifold or whatever it is a lot of times the easiest way to figure things out are to look at extremes. So in this Cleveland case, we'll look, okay, maybe they were talking about a stock-headed thing. So a stock motor back in the day, the Cleveland was the most powerful. And then on the opposite end of that, we would look at like dedicated race motors and see what's going on there. So we'll start off with the stock side. So looking at stock motors, like I said before, when we run a stock Cleveland head and compare that to a stock small block Chevy head or a small block Dodge head, the Cleveland has a definite advantage. There's no doubt about that. And back in the day, it was, relatively speaking, compared to the Dodge and the Chevy, at least in the domestic market, it definitely had an advantage. Now, was it the most powerful horsepower per cubic inch of any motor produced during the muscle car era? I don't know. And honestly, the Boss 351 that made the most power isn't the highest specific output. So if we're honing in on that right off the bat, we have to hone in on the definition. What is this definition? So the most horsepower per cubic inch, if we look at a specific output, we'd want to look at the Boss 302. Because when I tested it, the Boss 302 made about 372 horsepower or so, 375. And the 351 made 382 or 385. So more, but from a specific output standpoint, because the Boss did it with less displacement, it had a higher specific output. So it did very good. But would it do as well as the 396, a stock 390? And are we talking about stock motors? That's the thing. Are we talking about stock versions back then or modified versions? And also, are we talking about the rated power output, because the Boss was only rated at 290, or the actual power output, like what they made, like when I tested one on the Dyno? The problem with rated power outputs is the Cleveland is not going to come out on top if it's a rated power output. People, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, everybody played with their rated power outputs all the time. And they did that for a number of reasons. One was from the marketing department. The marketing department that said, hey, the higher the number that we give people, the more likely they are to buy it. So let's rate the power as high as we can. Oh, okay, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is, hey, we have this specific combination that has this motor in it. We want to rate it at a lower power output because more people will buy it because the insurance will be lower. That's another way. The other way is, hey, we want to rate this combination that we're building in low volume because we want to factor into the racing that we want it to do to help sell other stuff that's not that car, that's the other car that looks like that. So we want to rate it at a very low power level so that it factors favorably in the NHRA and goes out and win races. So again, and then during this time, during the 60s and early 70s, we also had the net versus gross. So we had a lot of juggling of different rated power outputs that may or may not have actually reflected what the actual power output was. And then and it doesn't say in the description that I read, it doesn't just say small block. So it says of any motor. So we have to decide that. Is it in stock trim? Is it the rated output? Is it as it was delivered and what it actually makes when you dyno test it? And then also, again, is it just in comparison to the motors of that era? And is it just in comparison to motors, domestic motors, or are there imports going on too? Because in the 60s and 70s, Ferrari had motors. They had 300 horsepower 3-liter motors. So from a specific power output standpoint, a Ferrari of that era made more power than a Boss 302 or a Boss 351 of that era. Now, the bigger motor might have been able to out-accelerate it if they did a drag race because it has more torque. It's a bigger motor. That's why we like those. I mean, let's be honest. But from a specific power output standpoint, it wouldn't have been, of all motors, wouldn't have been the best back then. Certainly wouldn't have been if it was a rated contest. Might not have been even if we concluded other motors like that 396, a 400 Pontiac. I mean, there are other ones that I would want to look at, because the thing that held the Boss back from making even more power is it was limited by, it had lots of head flow, but it was limited by cam timing with its factory cam timing. Also limited by static compression. It was lower than the Chevy and had a smaller camshaft than the Chevy. So I would want to look at other combinations and see if we could get something that, like an AMC maybe or something, that made a favorable specific output that could battle with the Boss. So the Cleveland might not have been the highest specific output of any motor in stock trim, as it, if we dyno tested, it certainly wasn't as it was rated. It certainly wasn't if you compare it to Ferraris and other motors of that time period. So if we then don't include just the time period thing and go, okay, it says ever produce. So if we roll into this thing even more modern, even just small blocks, let's say more modern small blocks, because they're going to be a higher specific output. Almost any LS makes more, has a higher specific output than the Boss 351 did, or the Boss 302. If you look at the specific output of an LS3, it makes 495 the way that we run it. It's bigger, but it makes a lot more power. So does an L83 5.3. I mean, to make more power than a Boss 351, all I have to do is go down to the wrecking yard and get a 5.7 Hemi out of a Ram, a truck motor, and it makes more power than a 351 Cleveland did. So anything modern, and then the LT1, the L86, those are even better than the LS3 was. So if we include those other motors from the modern era, the Cleveland isn't anywhere near the highest specific output. And those are just domestic motors. Again, if we include import motors like the 250 horsepower 2-liter Honda S2000, or lots of different Ferraris and lots of other imports, the new Chevrolet one, it's not, again, it's not that, it doesn't have the highest specific output. So from a stock standpoint, it's not that. So if it's not stock, well, remember, we started over there in the stock arena. What about as an absolute race motor? And we already touched on that a little bit. So the Cleveland had a big advantage in airflow over its comparable small block Chevy and Dodge back in the day in stock form. And carried that over if all you could do was port the stock heads. That worked out good. When they started introducing aftermarket heads, and when we're talking about full race dedicated builds with, everything goes kind of thing in a race program, dry sumps, ultra high compression, lots of RPM, lightweight valve trains, all of that stuff. How does the Cleveland compare there? Well, pretty favorably. I mean, it's a good head design. It makes lots of power. Look what it does in the forms of racing that it's still in. Look at what it does, for instance, in a sprint car motor. A Yates style headed sprint car motor makes a bajillion horse. In fact, it probably makes 300 or out of 358 inches or 360 inches, it's probably in the 900 horsepower range. So it's like this 430 horsepower version that the guy sent me the very cool link to, but they would do it with a lot less displacement. And the problem is that if we compare that to other motors of the modern era, all of the other heads have developed at least to be at least as good, and if not better than the Cleveland stuff has. So if you look at a modern small block Chevy head, an altered valve angle, and especially if you bring in, change in bore spacing and stuff, but even just an altered valve angle Chevy head can flow 450 or 460 CFM. So it can support a lot of power. Look at the LS engine family. Look at Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap, 358 inches, made 921 horsepower, up above 10,000 RPM. They ran it to 11,000 RPM, but that thing made 920 horsepower, being 358 inches. And that's not even the pinnacle of power. If you take like the link that they sent me for the 436 inch motor, I think it was, if you look at drag race motors in the LS family that the guys from Sam and others are doing, if you look at a motor that size and how far they're spinning them, that motor is an 1100 horsepower motor. So again, at the very least, in full race guys, the Cleveland is not head and shoulders above everybody else. In fact, it might not even be as good as other people are, as other engine families are. And then again, when we bring imports into it, if you look at a dedicated race motor that's 300 horsepower or more per liter, it's just not really even close. So, but look at all the things that we had to evaluate to try to figure that out. And that's the same thing when we apply it to a camshaft. And somebody says, well, what's the best cam? Well, let's go over all of the things that you have to go over to determine that. And not only do we have to go over all the things that I think should be there, we have to go over all the things that he thinks should be there or she thinks should be there, because their list is going to be different than mine. Even if we had all of the same points on there, they might not be in the same preference. The order might be different. What they value might be different than what I value. And so ultimately, when they pick a camshaft, this is why I like them picking the camshaft more than me, because what they like, some guys I just want chop. I don't care about anything. They don't care about what power it makes. It just has to have chop. Okay, that's your deal, and that's not what I would pick. I would at least want both. If I want the cam noise, I want the cam power too. Some guys don't care about that. They care about idle quality. They want an idle clip, and that's all they ever care about, because they're going to put that up on YouTube, and that's what they're going to brag to their friends about. Yeah, it's got the chop. That's all great. But the thing is, when you're looking at all this, a lot of this stuff could be subjective. And the interesting thing about like this, and I'm just using this as an example, but the Cleveland thing, I want a guy to love Clevelands. What I don't want is a guy that loves Clevelands that thinks that everything else is bad or everything else is less than that, because it's not. I mean, we've just demonstrated that that's not the case. And then certainly when I read if you read the email, and you guys let me know what you think, if there's a little bit of seemed like there was a little bit of sass here, but I don't begrudge a guy for doing that, because he thought that he had a gotcha moment or whatever. So his comment is he sent the link to the Engine Labs thing. Again, thank you, because that's really cool, because I like the Engine Labs guys. And then the only thing that it said was, "You stand corrected, sir. Now please acknowledge." Like, wow. That's interesting. But again, I love that kind of thing happens, because it gives me stuff to talk about for the live feed, and it's a learning experience for everybody. It's something that I can talk about that we can apply to a lot of other things. So if you're we get this a lot from when I talk about different kinds of forced induction. Turbo guys, oh shit, all the other stuff is just dumb. Okay. Turbos are the best thing ever. Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. You're not gonna find very, very many people that like turbos more than I do. But that doesn't stop me from recognizing and even liking and enjoying other forms of forced induction. I know what a centrifugal does. I loved having the Vortec on my Mustang and drove it around and had like endless amounts of fun and raced it and did all kinds of great things I will remember for my whole life. Positive displacement blowers do a different thing, but they're also awesome. Nitrous. I remember the first I put nitrous on a motor before I ever did any of the blower stuff for the turbo stuff. And I remember putting nitrous on. I'm like, oh, I can definitely see why people can get behind this, because we had a Camaro with a 350 and a mild cam and fuely heads and, carburetor. But then when we put, I remember the two things that I enjoyed the most. One was that we went from like a 308 gear to a 373 gear, and that was really, really good. And then we put a nitrous kit on it. It was like 100 shot, a plate shot under the carburetor. And that just totally transformed the car. It made it into something that was, was okay. But when I say okay, it was like maybe a high 13-second car or a low 14-second car into something that was all of a sudden, 100 more than that. So it was a 12-second car or something then. So it made a huge difference. And I love that stuff too. And I like when we get to run nitrous on the engine dyno, because, when you see the wah, bah, and it really, it's just awesome. So all of that stuff is good. And one of the things doesn't have to be better at the expense of the other things. That's just gets us kind of silly. So hopefully everybody's learned something and you can apply all this stuff. And it just goes to show you, when somebody makes even when I make a statement and you're like, yeah, but Richard, what would have to happen for us to prove that? You can remind me of that from time to time and go, hey, look, remember the thing that you were talking about? Yeah, you can't really prove that statement. So I don't mind. And the gentleman that sent this, please, I still want you here and all that nobody's picking on you. And I want you to point out if you think that I'm wrong. Everybody here does. I'm wrong a lot. So I don't mind being told that. That's all good. But on the Cleveland thing, it's not the most highest specific output ever, ever devised by man. It's a good engine and I like it. And like I said, I'm a big fan, but that's not the end all thing. In fact, to make that statement, not only is it obviously it's not accurate about the Cleveland, but it'd be really hard to make about any motor. So if you came out with, let's say we took an ultimate race motor that makes 300 horsepower per liter. It might be even more than that now, I don't know. But let's say that that's what it was. And so it's made out of a 3-liter motor to make a 900 horsepower. Well, if you just gave people free rein and said, look, there's no class that you're racing in. There's no rules. You can do whatever you want. You rev the motor as high as you want, because that's really what's restricting them from making more power. The specific horsepower output is just the specific torque output is kind of fixed and has been for a period of time, because they've gotten what they're going to get out of it. But if they can continue to do that at a higher and higher engine speed, they're going to make more power. And that's why Formula One, the kind of quintessential RPM-y kind of thing, that's why they limited it. But if you told them, look, rev to 25, 30,000, whatever you want to do, if you told them that, you would have even greater specific outputs than you have now. So what is what would the limit be? Where would we end at? And so if you're trying to talk about what the highest specific output of any motor is, you then, like we had to do just a little bit ago, you have to go and clarify that. Is it a production motor? Is it a race motor? Is it a class specific motor? You have to qualify all this stuff. Otherwise, you have these like ultra extreme examples, and then nobody really learns anything. All we do is get to argue, which is not good. Let's see how our poll is doing. This is interesting. Is the Ford Cleveland engine family the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced? We have 36% of people saying yes, that it is. That's interesting. So get up there and vote. And also, we have 242 people here and we have 88 likes. Really? Come on. I would like to prove the single plane versus dual plane is a cubic inch driven decision and not a pure power output thing. It's two things, Link. It's not just a cubic inch thing. It's an RPM and cubic inch thing. The single plane, no matter what displacement, well, see, I was going to make an absolute statement. No matter what displacement I've ever tested it on, there's always a crossover between the single plane and the dual plane. And then also, we can't, again, we're learning more. We can't identify single planes and dual planes as absolutes. It would matter a lot which ones you're testing. And because a lot of times when the dual planes are designed, like a 351 is a perfect example. A 351 Windsor dual plane, like an Edelbrock Performer RPM, was designed for a stock, or a 302 was designed for a stock head. So imagine what that's going to do on a 450-inch 8.2 deck head. it's not going to work very well. Not because a dual plane doesn't work at that displacement, but because that particular combination, the port flow and sizing was designed for small port heads. And so it doesn't work. The 351 is also designed that way. So to put it on a 408 or a 427 or something, or a 460, putting that dual plane on there. But if you made a dual plane that flowed more and it was bigger in every way, it would do something different. So you have to be, again, like we were talking about, you have to be specific in which ones you're talking about testing. I've seen pneumatic valves. Yeah, that's Formula One stuff. Have you been? You have to be careful saying they don't do it on racing, so it can't be that great because racing has rules sometimes that are disallowed. Yeah, sometimes racing specific classes are the most regulated stuff out there. Tom, most of the time, the rough surface of the intake port will atomize fuel and air. What's the max power ignition timing of a 4-valve Honda engine versus a 5.3 liter? It depends. All 4-valve Honda engines don't respond to the same timing level. Steven, I see here's a Cleveland fan. I love Cleveland's. I have a 4V and a 2V, but they don't compare to all the newer multi-valve stuff or even most of the aftermarket aluminum heads out now. They're not. I mean, a factory Cleveland head, let's face it, that a factory Cleveland head is as good as it was back in the day, and it's still pretty good, but that was 50 years ago. We've obviously come a long way in terms of technology and power output, and I think that something that the import market recognized long before the maybe not the Ford guys. Ford guys obviously recognized it, but most of the domestic manufacturers finally started putting cylinder heads like the Hemi head and the LS head, started putting really high flow heads so they could make the power and still make it with small camshafts. Have you ever done a Boss 302? Yes, multiple times. Take a look, that video's up. I compared the Boss 302, Greg, to a DZ 302 to see which one of them makes more power. And then we even did build-ups on both of those to try to get them each to make a lot more power. I'm building a tunnel around Pontiac for the fun of it to race at the No Name Nationals. Okay, I was trying to figure out where the brakes were there. If there wouldn't have been all of the emission stuff in the 70s, I bet the old stuff would be more competitive with the new engines. It wouldn't even be close. The emission stuff isn't what killed it's what killed stuff in the 70s and 80s. But before that, I mean, if you look at a 71 Boss 351, it was 11-to-1. It had Cleveland heads. It had a dual plane high-rise intake manifold. It had a big 4-barrel carburetor. They never had headers on them from the factory. The other thing that, like I talked about with the Cleveland stuff, they were limited by compression, and they were also limited by mild cam timing compared to the Chevys. Geo Metro, yeah, I'm Sprint Turbo, but the Geo Metro XFI, definitely one of my favorites. Richard, would you be better off with the Boss 302 or Cleavor, or just a 302 with aluminum heads? I wouldn't do a Boss 302. You could make a lot more average power with a 350 or a 302 Windsor with any of the AFR, trick flow, or any of those kinds of heads. I think you'd be much happier with that than you would be with a stock Boss headed 302. There are lots of aftermarket Boss heads that you could use on that 302 and make a aluminum headed Boss 302, which would also work well. 1970 Boss 302 ran 1190 in the quarter mile. A stock one didn't do that. Absolute statements never work. See, wheel-based media is he's on top of things. He recognizes. See what you did there. The 351 Cleveland had the same horsepower per cubic inch as a Gordon Murray T50. It would make 937 horsepower in stock trim. That's the thing. I mean, it's, you know, when you're talking about race motors, it's like a whole nother world. Funny how a stock 85 302 roller with AFR head stock cam 172 rockers made 400 horsepower. I would like to see that happen. I don't think that that's real. Do you know the intake runner size on a Boss 302? We did measure the port volume, and I wrote it down. I honestly don't remember what it was. Tom, the CVCC had a pre-chamber valve so that they would create a stratified charge. It was pretty cool. So that they could run that. That was the way that they, rather than induce mixture motion, they were trying to get a complete burn under cruise. So what they were doing is igniting a richer mixture in a smaller chamber. And then once that was ignited, they were introducing that into the main chamber so that they would get complete burn. It's really a pretty cool idea. With the VX that I have, they don't need to do that. They induce mixture motion by altering the opening of the valves, and the valves don't open very much on the economy load, basically. And then they run it at 19-to-1 air fuel. Are you familiar with Speedmaster, and do you have an opinion looking to make 500 horsepower on the street with a 408 stroke 351 Cleveland? We had, in the test that I had, in fact, I think in the photo that I have up, I'm surprised nobody mentioned it. That's it's not a Cleveland motor. It's a 400M. And I know I'm going to get comments from the 400M guys. I look at it as a 400-inch, tall deck stroker Cleveland, but it's actually a 400M. And I have used the Speedmaster heads, but they were completely redone by Bryce over at when he was at Dr. J's. And so they worked fairly well. We put our own valves and springs and everything in. Boss 302 ran 1190 with 14-to-1 compression. So that's not, that's far from being a stock motor. Let's see. Here's something. Tall wheel. Let's see. Here's something to think about on aviation engines that have 2 plugs per cylinder, and during the run-up, when you perform a magneto check, there's an RPM drop when you switch between mags. How much power would a 429 make with an aluminum Cobra Jet heads with a 630 solid? The lift really doesn't tell me anything about the camshaft, unfortunately. Mark Sanchez has some pretty good power combinations for the 429 that make low 600s. One of the magazines did an AFR 165 head test on a stock bottom end roller 302. So would a roller 302 be an 85? Victor Jr. intake 1.7 rockers and made 402 horsepower. I'd like to see that with a stock cam. Like I said, I haven't tested lots and lots of Ford stuff. That seems high to me. Still waiting on a short block and cam kit for the Hemi. You should do Boss 302 heads intake on an 85 roller block. We actually did on the Boss 302 that I built that we ran. It actually was a hydraulic roller block. It was a late model 302 block. but we put, you know, Cleveland specific pistons in it. How much cam on a 377 with TFS 195 heads to make 500 horsepower? Not very much. A 377, I think on that 363 that I did, the Dart SHP one, we were making 560. That had a pretty good sized bullet camshaft in it, but I think if you ran that XFI, that 236, 248 cam on there, it would do that. I don't know what the Wes. I don't know what the compression was on the Boss 302s because they were built by a variety of different people. I'm hoping that they turned it up. The Toyota 3T GTE was a 2-plug spark. Yeah, the NAPC engines from Nissan, yeah, also had that. I remember working on those. What's the difference between a 454 cubic inch version of this? What do you mean of this? And an LS6 big block Chevy? I don't know what your question is. So who had the better head back in the day? Was it the Hemi or was it the Cleveland? Well, one of those was a big block and one of those was a small block. So even if one of them had a better head, the other one had more displacement. I don't know what does anybody know what a stock 426 Hemi head flows? I've never flowed one. A4 block for the Trans Am series. They had Boss blocks. A4 blocks would have been aftermarket ones, but the Boss blocks were much stronger than the regular Windsor blocks. To run really lean air-fill mixture, it has to be precisely controlled on all of your cylinders. You will get a lean misfire. Well, you still need to control it in each cylinder, and the way that they do that, like I said, with the Honda, and this is fairly common, is the reason that you get misfire in there is because you don't have a homogeneous mixture. Like when it's lean, there are isolated pockets of fuel. That's why they have mixture motion that goes in and swirls all that around, and then you get even burn. And that's why they're very critical when they why they did it on the VX and why they've done it in other ways, like that stratified charge deal was another way that they could overcome that. I don't have engines right now that are for sale. Just Googled 426 Hemi head flow and it says 330 CFM. Yeah, so that's more. That's quite a bit more than a, if that's right, that's more than a Cleveland head flows. I'm looking to build an ultimate street strip 496. No budget. What would your internals parts list be, including cam, looking for big power, AFR, throw heads? Caveman, do you have your heads? If not, call me or send me an email. There's my email address. If you're looking for 305 heads, let me know. Sorry, Rob, I spelled your name wrong. Is it fair to say that anything that will increase engine efficiency will also increase engine horsepower? No. If you make the motor leaner under cruise, it will increase the efficiency. And if you measure efficiency as fuel mileage, and that will have no effect on peak power. Roy, you want a 5.7 LS1, truck Norris cam, and an LSA blower, 6-speed, 4th gen. That will work out good. What does a 4V head flow? The ones I flowed a set of, they were both closed chamber. One of them was a Boss 302 head. The other one was a 71 351 Cleveland head. and both of them flowed like 275. Richard, what do you think about port mismatch? Do you think a large port mismatch with the intake being smaller would leave much power on the table? No, I don't think that the port match. I haven't seen anybody show me where that makes power. I haven't seen it at the dyno, and I've been doing this for 25 or 30 years. I haven't seen anybody show me a back-to-back test where that actually added anything. It would definitely not add anything if the rest of the port in the intake was small and all you did was make it bigger right at the end to meet up to the head. I don't think that would do anything. If it was bigger inside and it necked down at the end and you made that part bigger to mate up to the head that was also bigger, maybe there could be something there. Again, it would be specific to the two things that you were matching. What I can tell you is the manufacturer of the gasket is not an expert in head flow or intake flow. So people that are scribing it out to the gasket are doing that based on somebody that made a product that has nothing to do with airflow. And that's just me. Let's see. Can the 1985 L98 on C4 be fast? Yes, it can. We ran a turbo version that made 600 horsepower. So Racer D, I would agree. CHI does make really good Cleveland heads. Specific output of the 60s muscle car engines would be more obvious without factory restrictions. What are you talking about with factory restrictions? So like production-based Trans Am racing. But that's not a production engine. They changed everything on almost everything. There were some rules, but that's a race engine. So can we compare a 60s era Trans Am engine to an 80 or 90 or 2000 eras Trans Am engine? They're both 5 liters. And it won't even be close. It'll be hundreds of horsepower more on a modern Trans Am motor. The 60s stuff was not restricted because, well, not because of emissions, not because of other things, more because they didn't have as good a cylinder head. They didn't have as good of a lot of things. They didn't have hydraulic roller cams. Most of them didn't have windage trays. They didn't have a lot of stuff. Todd, thank you very much. Have you ever flown a 429 Super Cobra Jet head? No, I've not even seen one of those in person. DeVille, if you want to make more power of your TBI, it's going to take programming. They have bigger throttle bodies and bigger fuel injectors for those. You can put a small camshaft in it. You can put headers on it. Your oncologist is trying to kill you. Dude, hang in there, man. You're tough. Turbo Monza, are you going to run that thing on the dyno? 10.5 to 1, trick flow, 215 heads, 600, 248, 254. That's a good size cam. 110 Super Victor, CNC ported, 950 quick fuel. So that has all the right stuff on. I don't remember what those 215 heads flow. I'm thinking that that's going to be 50. Let me take out my calculator here. Maybe, I don't know. maybe 500. Got a shout out to Ish. I know he is cool. So shout out to Ish. What's up, Ish? I don't need to run it. I just wonder if you were going to run it. A Ford SHO V6 was capable of 10,000 RPM. They weren't capable of that stock. They were capable of that after you did a lot of stuff to them. Because the guys from the show shop did one, but they won't do that with stock valve train in it. Should do a Toyota 5.7. A good cylinder head should flow 300 CFM at 500 lift. That's not easy to do. And then if you also have a really good 400 number, that's also beneficial. Does it take that much cam for 500 horsepower? What would you guess you could get? I wouldn't run a single pattern cam, so that's not what I would run in a 408. Richard, did you ever flow a set of small block tunnel port heads? No, I've never looked at that stuff. Big Belly Racing. Does anybody know what the first year for the roller 5-liter was? Was it 85? Ben, have you heard good or bad things about Comp Cam's quality lately? I don't know. I haven't run a lot of their stuff lately. Don't those flow numbers, depending on what cam you're using? The flow numbers through the head have nothing to do with the camshaft. Or were you referring to Racer's thing about the 300 valve lift at 500 lift, the 300 CFM? I think he's talking about 2-valve stuff there. Have you ever done any single versus dual pattern cams? Yeah, I did a test recently. I've done that before, but I just did one recently, not too long ago with the guys from Engine Masters. They make a lot of dual pattern cams that have the same intake lobes, right? I don't know what you mean. Yeah, the 85 was carbureted. They went to fuel injection in 86 and had the weird cylinder head on it the first year for the fuelie, and then that was the 200 horsepower version. Then 87, they went to 225. If you had two Clevelands exactly the same, except one has stock heads and the other has AFR heads, would they make pretty much the same power? Well, you're right off the bat, you're going to have a change in chamber volume. You're going to have a change in port volume. You're going to have change in valve size. You're going to have change in intake manifold. So that's going to be that's going to be a difficult test to just have one thing be different. GSF 420, 1,000 wheel horsepower capable, Iron Eagle 363, 8292 turbo, 739 lift, 150 pound injectors, 7050. I don't know about the fuel pump. I've never used that fuel pump. Terminator X, that's fine. Airflow 220s, that's all fine. As long as the turbo will support that, which I think an 82 millimeter would certainly do that. Greg, I'm really familiar with the article. I just have never seen that happen, and I've tested hundreds of 5-liter combinations. Richard, have you ever seen, and I won't believe it. I don't believe that that was accurate. I've seen other tests in the magazine that I don't believe are accurate. I don't believe that that number is accurate until I verify it. Richard, have you ever seen the numbers for Mercedes M156? I have not. What do you do about turbo hats for a dual quad EFI tunnel ram? Have I ever tried it? You could make two of them if it's a twin turbo, or you could make a single hat that has two enclosures on it. The Callaway Sledgehammer was not an L98. It was a dedicated motor build. The Callaway Corvette, the Callaway twin turbo Corvette, not the Sledgehammer, which was their top speed thing. The Callaway Corvette was a twin turbo L98. A lot of guys are big fans of the Quad 4, but I'm a big fan of those. You ever ran the old Torquer intake for a small block Chevy? I think Westech has one of those. I know that I've run the Ford version. I don't remember doing the Chevy, but I thought that the Westech guys had one. How about a stroke 351 in Cleveland versus a worked big block 496? Because that's the other thing that when I was talking about the difference, the specific output difference. I mean, think about this. We have big block heads that flow 600 CFM. What if we make a small displacement big block with that kind of head? I mean, you know, the potential is obviously a lot. Yes, Michael, until I verify it. And the reason that I say that is because I've built AFR headed small blocks 306s with cams in them that just eked out 400 horsepower. So if you put a stock cam in it, it's going to be down quite a bit. So I don't know why theirs would be so special. That's what makes me wonder. That might be a really good Mythbuster kind of thing for me to do. Five-liter Mustang from late 80s saved American performance. It did. They had a good battle with the Chevy stuff, with the IROCs and stuff too. When they introduced fuel injection for Ford had the Boss stuff before that, 82, 83, 84, 85. But it started not just the performance, but it spawned like $1 billion performance industry also for the 5-liter stuff. It was amazing because the Mustang, the Ford guys finally got a taste of what the Chevy guys had enjoyed for a long time before that, with 20 sets of cylinder heads available and stuff. I know a small displacement big block. I'm not the first one to think of that. Obviously, the guys out at Bonneville do stuff like that. I have a 64 Falcon. I'm putting a 72 4V head on it, backed by T5, and a 2004 Cobra IRS with 355 gears. Very cool. I believe the heads are open chamber. They will still work just fine. Just put the right kind of piston in it. What company do you think has the best off-the-shelf cam grinds? We just went over what the best means, so you're going to have to tell me what you mean by that. If two manufacturers have cams that are both 212, 218, and they're the same lift and they're the same lobe separation angle, there's a really good chance that the power output's going to be comparable, if not identical. Steve, why'd you retract your message? I haven't split a 302 on the dyno. The guys from HP Performance did when we were doing a test with them on a turbo version. Richard, have you ever dyno tested a 396 versus a 400 small block? I have not. The only 400 small block I've run is an aftermarket block 400. Clinton, how much power does a 1970 Dove Block 429 handle? How much can it handle? It can handle a ton. We made 950 or 970 or something with a 460 block. So you're fine. Charles, I think that the 5-liter Mustang stuff was for CHPs. I think that was nationwide. Humble beginnings. I'm not in Texas. I'm in California. Daniel, I have a vintage Scorpion single plane. Do you? They also had a Tarantula with the rotated carburetor. I have not run that, and I certainly haven't run that on a Cleveland. I haven't run 8-to-1 headers on the engine dyno. They've run a lot of sand rails and stuff over on the chassis dyno side that have that 8-to-1. They sound really cool. I don't know what they do for power, though. Picking turbo size for a Cummins, same or different from a gas engine. I would still base that on power output. It's just that it's going to happen at a different engine speed and the Cummins is going to be big. If you do offset keepers, how much more do they work out? Well, most people sell plus 50 and minus 50 keepers. So 50 thousandths is what is going to change the installed height. Justin, I do like the quad fours, the Oldsmobiles. I raced in a Chiva, and it was very, very cool. And I wish I could have got that 442 that was in the wrecking yard. I would base it on horsepower output and not torque output, because when you choose one for a gas engine, do you base it on torque output? The torque output's that's going to happen based on how you control your boost, but it's not going to be that with the turbo. It has to feed a certain amount of airflow, and then the amount of torque that you make is going to be less dependent on boost than it is going to be on your fueling. Richard, do you have any experience with a 4-liter Barra? I have taken one apart now. That's as much as I can say. Can you splay a 352 bolt? I think you can. You have a 225 horsepower quad 4 for sale. The AFR heads, did you polish the intakes and Scotch-Brite wakes them up fully CNC'd? GBS Garage, you have a 70 Boss 351 Mustang. That's very cool. Tail, here's something to think about. The melting point of aluminum piston material is 1300 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly, but the temperature in the combustion chamber is around 4000. Why doesn't the piston melt? Because it's not 4000 degrees for very long. It's instantaneously. The piston is never at that temperature. In fact, the piston is never near its melting point, hopefully. Scott's house. This is a good one. This will be the last one for tonight because I got to get going. Richard, in your opinion, is balancing the runner flow as close as possible on a Parker funnel web worth the effort, horsepower versus cost? Here's what I want you to think about. Are all of those runners the same length and the same shape? Are the outer runners the same as the outer 4 because it's a single plane intake on a Ford. Are the outer runners the same as the inner runners? Are they the same length? They're not. So what is it going to do if they flow the same? It's not going to do anything, because they're still going to make power at different engine speeds because of the length. So honestly, I wouldn't go to the extreme or to the effort of making them flow the same. If you want to improve flow, I would say that could add power. But making them the same, you're making things that are different and trying to make them the same in flow when they're not the same in other things. So I wouldn't worry about that. 2 more minutes. That's right. I remember when we did. I'm going to go ahead and close out. That this is really interesting. Is the Ford Cleveland engine family the most powerful engine per cubic inch ever produced? We have 37% people saying yes. That's very interesting. 362 votes. Thank you guys for voting. 63% saying no. That's very cool. So we'll end that. Thin layer of aluminum oxide is totally different. You know, as hard as a diamond. I did a cool test, and then I'm going to get going. We took an aluminum piston. We put this coating on the top of it. It was I forgot what it's called, rattlesnake or diamond or something like that. Diamondback. I think it was a diamondback coating. And they sprayed it with this gun that, I don't know, he said accelerated the particles to Mach 6 or something. It was really cool. It looked like a laser gun that they were putting it on this piston. And then to demonstrate how tough the coating was, and that was actually tougher than the piston that it had coated, we put the piston in an autoclave and then just melted the piston. And the piston melted down to, molten aluminum essentially. And then the coating was still solid and just kind of floating around on the molten aluminum. So he said, okay, that shows you that it's, it doesn't exactly show that, but it was still really cool. And it was just awesome to be able to melt the piston down. So that was kind of cool. So he's showing you how tough the coating was, and obviously it was tough enough to do that. So it's kind of cool. Thank you guys all for showing up. I have the video going up on the 500 horsepower stuff that I'm editing right now, and then we'll follow it up with a 6 and 7 and yada, 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 all that stuff. I will see you guys all tomorrow.